You're listening to Saturday Morning Media. And now, back to our show. Under the Puppet is made possible by the Saturday Morning Media Patreon patrons who support the show over at patreon.com/Saturday Morning Media. Welcome to Under the Puppet, the show that talks to professional puppeteers about the art and business of puppetry with the sole purpose of helping you up your puppet game. My name is Grandpa Choco, and this is Under the Puppet. Welcome back to Under the Puppet. When I was first starting to put ideas together for Under the Puppet, I made a list of puppeteers I would love to interview on this show. And at the top of that list was Phillip Huber. I first saw Phillip Huber's work at the O'Neill Puppetry Conference and was immediately blown away by his tremendous skill. His work has been seen in films such as Oz, the Great and Powerful, and Being John Malkovich, and he has performed all over the world with his company, Huber Marionettes. Here now is my interview with Phillip Huber. Phillip Huber, welcome to Under the Puppet.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
I'm so excited to have you on the show. Is this true that you got your very first puppet when you were 3 years old?
That is correct. My mother gave me a puppet at age 3. It was a small Stiff dog hand puppet, and I loved it so much. And she gave it to me because I was extremely shy. Mm-hmm. And I guess she thought that it might help me express myself. And of course, I'm sure she never expected me to express myself into a career with it.
Right.
But that's what happened.
Was that your sort of first exposure to puppetry that you can remember, was getting that puppet?
It was.
Yeah.
Yes. I watched all of the television shows at the time that had puppets in them. Howdy Doody I watched religiously, and any of the Captain Kangaroo and anything that had puppets on it, I was just fascinated. And I can remember when Howdy Doody went off the air and I sat in front of the television and cried. I was so upset.
Yeah. You moved on from just that hand puppet at a very early age, right, into doing marionettes?
Yes, I did. I stayed with the hand puppets. I had my first marionette when I was 5, I will say that. My mother got it with S&H green stamps, and it was a Howdy Doody marionette. Mm-hmm. And my father had a fit that I got that. But anyway, I wasn't a natural with a marionette. It was still too much for me at 5 years old. And I would tangle it pretty quickly, and my father would hang it from a floor lamp and untangle it for me very patiently and then give it back to me, and it'd be a mess again very shortly. So the hand puppets were much easier for me to do, and I stayed with them probably until I was about 10 or so. And I can remember when I was 11, I was given gifts of Pelham puppets. They were made in England, and they were very good marionettes. And they were made out of wood, and they had metal joints, and so they were sturdy. And sometimes I would change the characters. My mother would make new costumes for them and things like that. And I would restring them to do different things. And those became my principal performance puppets. And I was very entrepreneurial. I would try to create shows for different holidays, and I would actually print up little posters and post them around town and sell tickets.
Wow.
And neighborhood children would come in, and I had a permanent puppet theater that was built in my basement then that my mother helped me build. And I would do that to earn extra money, and just because I loved it, just because I loved doing that performing. And the Pelham puppets were the principal part of that. When I was 15, I suddenly started building my own. I didn't have anybody around to show me how to do it. So instead, I just got library books, and I started to learn from that. And there was one other young kid from Dixon, Illinois, where I was growing up, fairly small town in the northern part of Illinois, and his name is David Herzog. And he and I started building puppets together, and we both became professional puppeteers. David Herzog is an established professional in Chicago, Illinois, doing shows all the time. And so we helped each other right at the beginning.
Yeah, and it certainly sounded that your parents were supportive as well.
Yeah, my father died when I was 8, so he wasn't around. I'm not sure how supportive he would have been of this, because it was probably something totally out of his ken. But anyway, my mother was very supportive. Yeah, she helped me as much as possible. And as a matter of fact, David, when he was building his puppets, his parents weren't exactly happy that he was doing that. So he would come over, and my mother would make costumes for his puppets as well. And so we were more like brothers than I am with my real brothers, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
Because we really grew up together. I had 2 older brothers, but they were already out of the house when I was born. So I was raised basically as an only child. Mm-hmm. And the puppetry was my way of expressing myself, and it became my passion.
Yeah. When you were doing your own shows in high school, were you sort of, I mean, you had the theater in your garage where you were doing that, but when you started doing shows in high school, were you booking those yourselves, like just finding places to perform?
At 15, I declared myself professional, which was pretty brazen. And I started doing I put together a variety show at that point. I had done fairy tales before then and all the traditional things that you would think of that puppets might be performing. But I had seen a professional puppeteer performing a variety show with marionettes. And I thought, wow, that's really what I would like to do, because I want to create characters that do all sorts of different things. Mm-hmm. And I was pretty technically minded, so I liked figuring out how to create these unique events that would happen with a character, vignettes. And so when I saw that, I started putting together this variety show. And my first variety show was a combination of the commercial puppets I had, which were the Pelhams, and refigured to do certain things. And then I started building, of course, my own marionettes and making them by hand. And I put together this variety show and sold it for Cub Scout banquets and mother-daughter banquets and the Lions Club and whoever else would hire me. At that time, I also entered a couple of talent shows. There was a big talent show in Dixon, Illinois called the Petunia Festival Talent Show once a year. And I entered that and I was act number 13, which, of course, everybody kidded me about, that I was such bad luck to have act number 13. But I won first place.
Wow.
And it was a huge event for me. They put my picture on the front page of the local newspaper, and suddenly that was a big encouragement for me. I thought, well, maybe I'm on the right track.
Yeah.
And so I really was focusing as a professional at the age of 15.
Wow. And are there characters that you were working with then that are still in your act today?
Absolutely. But there are variations of them. They're modern upgrades, of course, because my earliest characters were pretty crude. And of course, without the proper training of working with other professionals at the time, I'm sure everything about my show was probably pretty crude, but it was good enough that it impressed people, and they hired me.
Yeah.
And so that was what was important right at that point.
Were you doing, like at 15, were you doing just a couple shows a year, or were you getting pretty good bookings out of it?
I was getting pretty good bookings, but it tended to be seasonal, I think. It was more around the holidays and things like that I would be busy, as I recall. Anyway, but I did work my way through high school and through college doing those shows.
And what did you study? Did you study an artistic thing in college?
I was a theater major with an art minor. And I was also a double major for a while in education, because my mother admonished me before I left for college, and she said, be sure and study something that you can earn a living with. So even though she was very supportive, I don't think she trusted that puppetry was a true profession.
Right. And did you go to college in Illinois as well?
Yes, Principia College in Southern Illinois. It's a small private liberal arts college, pretty close to St. Louis, across the border in Illinois.
And were you still doing shows during all that time as well?
I was, yes. And of course, especially during any school break, I would be doing shows. But basically, I was known as the puppet guy on campus by the other students, and I became famous for that.
Yeah. And had you already sort of, not to get too much into the technical end of starting a business, but was it already a business by then, like Huber Marionettes?
I considered it a business, but it certainly wasn't enough to support myself.
Right.
It was just helping out I still had scholarships and grants and aids and everything to get through college.
How long after that did you move out to California?
It was literally 1 or 2 weeks. I had sent a video. And at that time, it was pretty rare that you'd actually create a video to send to somebody for an audition. But I had looked at the different puppeteers that I might want to work for, and somebody that was recommended to me was Philippe in France. And the other person, of course, was the Muppets were obvious, but Muppets wasn't really what I did. I was so entrenched in the marionettes and so enjoyed the technical aspects of that I didn't think I wanted to try to work for the Muppets. And so I was looking for someplace else, and I had seen marionettes on television that I thought were just fantastic. And they were on the Dean Martin show, and they were Sid and Marty Krofft, supposedly. And I went to a national festival for the Puppeteers of America, which I also had joined at age 15. And this was giving me exposure to professional puppeteers where I could talk to at their national festivals that they would hold each year. And at one of those festivals, I saw displayed some marionettes created by Tony Urbano. And when I talked to some people about that, they said, oh, yeah, Tony did all those puppets that were on the Dean Martin show. And suddenly it all clicked for me. He was the one I needed to be working for. And so I created a video at college, and I sent it off to him. 2 weeks after graduation, I think it was about 2 weeks after graduation, I received a letter from him with an offer of a job and a plane ticket to fly out to California. Now, Tony told me he had never done anything like that before. It was a big risk for him, and I don't think he ever did anything like that afterwards. When he was hiring people afterwards, it was always people that he could just audition in person right there. But he hired me blind. I came out to California and started working for him, and it was great because I was working some of the first shows he was doing. It was at Laguna Beach Festival of Arts, doing the marionette shows there. And of course, I was the number 2 puppeteer, so I was giving all the left-handed work to do, where you'd enter puppets from the left-hand stage left and have to do it left-handed. So I really became proficient at being ambidextrous with marionettes at that time as well. But I went on to work for Tony for 8 years. I consider him my mentor and the person who taught me the most about the business, about the artistic requirements for this art. And it was a wonderful time. I learned so much because he was doing television. He was doing the series Dusty's Treehouse at that time, which I appeared on numerous times. And lots of television commercials would come up, and I did that. And then lots of live theater productions, sometimes with symphony orchestras. So I was able to work at the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion in Los Angeles and all these places, and very exciting. And so 8 years worth of that, I became his production supervisor. So each new puppeteer that came in, I would audition them, and I would train them. And I knew every role in all of Tony's shows at one time, and I could do any of them. I could move into any position that he needed another puppeteer in.
Yeah, and I'm sure working for him, especially in that position as well, you learn the artistic side of it, but you also learn the business side of it as well.
That's right, yeah. You learn quite a bit about that. You learn about auditioning and things like that just from being a part of that world and finding out what the requirements were for all the different things. So, of course, I worked Muppet-style puppets in a lot of the television commercials. I was inside costume characters for some television commercials. But still, Tony's focus, and I think his first love, seemed to be the marionettes. I can't really speak for him, absolutely, but it always seemed like that was a big focus of his company, and that's why I enjoyed being there so much.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned you worked these different styles, hand puppets and inside a costume. Do you think it's important for puppeteers to be familiar with those different styles of puppetry?
I think absolutely, yeah. The more you can do, the more flexible you can be in a profession of puppetry, the better it is for you, because then you don't have any of these limitations. You know, I don't feel limited that I just have to be a marionette artist. It's just what I choose. But if you know all these other things, then when those types of jobs become available, you can go for it. Unfortunately, I find that sometimes puppeteers are very focused on one area, and nowadays it seems to be they're very focused on the hand and rod puppets, what you call mouth puppets or Muppet type of characters. And in which case they don't know anything about marionettes. And if there happens to be an audition for marionettes, I'll see loads of puppeteers come out for it, and they're not really prepared.
Yeah.
Marionettes are so technical and very, very tricky, and you can't fake them.
Yeah.
You can go in and tell a producer you're really good at it, but you're going to be exposed badly later if you don't know.
I can tell you about my audition story, knowing nothing, auditioning for Tony Urbano back when I was in college, and he just handed me a marionette, and I was like, I don't know what to do with this.
Yes.
This is not what I signed up for. So after the 8 years of working with Tony, where did you head after that?
Well, then I started my own company with my partner, David Alexander, and he had been encouraging me. He had also come to work for Tony Urbano for the last few years that we were there, and he had been encouraging me to start our own company. And so 1980, we did that, and I started out rebuilding the puppets that I had made when I was a teenager, and creating, again, a variety show that would work with that. And while working for Tony, he had actually gotten a job that was on a cruise ship at one point. And I thought, wow, that's an interesting area that I'd never thought of before. And I realized that the cruise ships were really kind of the vaudeville of today. They were a place where variety acts could work on a steady basis, and you could really improve your performance and hone your craft doing cruise ships. And so that's kind of what I aimed for. And David encouraged me also to really head for the adult market, which is what I enjoyed. I think of puppetry as a theater art form, and I think of it in a sophisticated way. So my show is always appropriate for an entire family, but it's aimed for the adult. Mm-hmm. And the adult, if I can't keep the adult entertained, then I don't want to be doing what I do.
Right.
I want it for everybody. And unfortunately, in the United States, puppetry tends to be pushed into the area of, it's for children. And so everybody thinks of birthday party shows, everybody thinks of library shows or school shows or working on television in a children's show. But I didn't really want to focus on any of those things. I wanted to be in theater as an adult market. Or in film, too, which I've been very fortunate to do.
Yeah. When you did get to work on cruise ships.
Yes,
right?
I'm still working on cruise ships. They still fill in certain amounts of my time each year. And I've done that now for 32 years. Unbelievable that it's been that long.
What do cruise ships expect from a performer in terms of the show that they bring on the ship?
It depends on the cruise line. Each cruise line seems to be focusing on a different thing. And they go through periods where they decide they want certain styles of entertainment. Like some ships nowadays only want Cirque du Soleil type of acts. Or some shows only want what they think are going to be shows that will appeal to younger audiences, even though still a good portion of any cruise audience is an older, more mature audience.
Right. Because
those are the people that can afford to take the vacations, and especially the long-term vacations like the world cruises and things like that. So generally, they want an entertainer that can come on, and it used to be they would actually use you like a variety entertainer. You'd be plugged into a show with several other types of variety acts, so that each night it might be 3 different performers, each doing like 20 minutes or so in the show. And after a while, that evolved, and now the ships that hire me, they want me to be able to do my own show, and they want more than one show. If you can do it, they want as many as 3 complete evening shows out of you. And if you can do supplemental things, for instance, I actually do a lecture where I talk about how I make the puppets and how they work, and I demonstrate it, and people are fascinated by the behind-the-scenes work, especially of marionettes, because it's something that they can't relate to, that they don't think about in a general basis. So I also give this daytime lecture, and it helps for people to have an appreciation of the art form.
Yeah. How long a show do you have? Like how long could you go right now?
Oh, I can do a 90-minute show on my own.
Right.
But for the cruise ships, if you do longer than 45 minutes, you're you're pressing it, because the audience has spent all day touring. Sometimes they're drinking right before the show. They've had a big dinner.
Right.
They'll come in and they'll fall asleep right in the front row in front of you, and you can't take it personally. And they'll also get up and walk out on you at any point, and that may be because they're tired. That may be because they don't like what you're doing. It's a little bit harder to determine. It's a whole different audience mindset, because they aren't purchasing a ticket to see you.
Right.
That's what makes it more challenging, and not every entertainer can make it on ships. It's a difficult and challenging market because of that.
Right, right. When you're developing pieces for your show, does the puppet come first, or does the idea for the piece come first, or how do you develop that?
Oh, there's many different ways that I come upon ideas. I'm a people watcher, number one, and so I just love watching people and seeing what they're doing, and sometimes that'll spark an idea for a character in my head, and maybe I'll just start sketching and sketch out a character. But generally, I like to choose the music first. I like to find the music. Music speaks to me in a visual way, not just an audible way, and I can actually picture what's going on with a piece of music. And then I can build to do that specific of a action or series of actions from the puppets. And so it's important to me, whenever I can, to find music first and then build the act around it. Mm-hmm. But I have several acts, and some of them have been some of my most popular ones, that I have built as a character first, whether they were a portrait of a celebrity, which a few of mine are, although I don't do it specifically to play on the celebrity name. I have a portrait of a celebrity because I appreciate what they do, and it's kind of a tribute to them, but it doesn't matter to me whether people recognize that celebrity or not. What's more important is that they really are interested in what that puppet is doing and the personality it expresses on stage. And that's what says everything. If the puppet doesn't have a personality, then it becomes just a mechanical thing in front of an audience. And then it might be a technical marvel to them, but it won't really be theater. It won't pull them in and make them care about that person or animal or whatever it is they're watching. So I always say that any puppet, it doesn't matter what kind it is, it has to have some sort of a heart to it. It has to have a unique personality that people can relate to, see, and they fall in love with in one way or another, or maybe they even hate it, but they are engaged with that character on stage because of that heart that it has, the soul. Mm-hmm.
Your career also led you to perform on Broadway as well. Can you talk a bit about your Broadway experience?
Yeah, my Broadway experience was interesting because it was Tommy Tune came on board a cruise ship, and he wasn't coming on board as a performer. He was a guest that they would interview, of course, because he happened to be a celebrity on board. But he was on, and he was on with Jeff Calhoun. Jeff was kind of his protege at that time, a young director and choreographer as well. And they saw my show on the ship, and they fell in love with it. And we talked a couple of times while he was on the ship, but at one point, David and I came back from the cruises, and on our answering machine was this message. And it was "Hi, this is Tommy Tune. I saw you on the ship, and I am doing this new Broadway show, and I want you to be a part of it, so give us a call." I wish we would have kept that message, because that was just it was monumental to me. Oh, Broadway show, wow, your ears perk up right away. And sure enough, it was a show written by the Sherman Brothers, which was just had gorgeous, gorgeous music in it, called Busker Alley. And so first, Tommy flew us out to New York, and we were workshopping the production. And the first thing Tommy and Jeff did was that they took me to a dance studio, and there was a particular marionette character I had, which was a break-apart puppet. It was a scarecrow. And Tommy loved that character, and he thought somehow he could use that in the show. So Jeff basically choreographed a routine for Tommy and I to do, and I had to They wanted to see how fast I could pick it up. And they didn't know my background was in dance. I started taking dance. It was mostly tap and jazz, but I started taking dance when I was 6 years old and continued it for the next 11 years. And so I did have all of that behind me, which also helps. As a puppeteer,
I was going to ask that after you
have
finished.
to be almost like a triple threat. I can sing. I'm not a brilliant singer, but I can act. And I again, as a theater major, I performed in all sorts of things in college. So all of that was important to me as a puppeteer. And sure enough, they choreographed this number. They liked it right away because I just picked it up and we did it. And so that was it. So then I went into the workshop of that production and we started that. We workshopped it for several weeks. I don't remember how long that took. And then they got producers that came on board to support the production. And the idea was they were going to tour it for, I forget, like 8 months around the United States. They had all these cities booked for the tour. And then we would come back and it would open on Broadway at the St. James Theater was where it was planned. And it was interesting because when they first started to promote this show, they brought in all the touring theater producers to New York, and they were supposed to see something to do with this show. Well, they didn't have anything to show them. So Tommy said, "You guys just do your show." And then we're going to say, and they are going to appear in Busker Alley. So literally, we were the thing that was selling the show right at the beginning. We did a whole performance of my variety show, and that was it. And the interesting thing is the show had a dog character in the show. It was supposed to be a live performing dog. And Tommy had that all arranged, that there'd be a dog trainer and a dog that would come in and do the show. And he didn't realize that I had a little marionette dog that was named Taffy. He hadn't seen it on the cruise ship. And so we did our variety show there. And then when I finished with the variety show, I also took the dog around and improvised with it and walked in amongst all the people that were there. And Tommy walks in and sees the dog and he goes, "That's Mate." Mate was the name of the character in this show. So suddenly I was doing more than just what he thought I would be doing in the show, because Mate was a principal part of the Busker Alley as well, and supposed to be a live dog. Yeah. So at first there were people that were kind of upset that a marionette dog was going to be playing a live dog. And there were comments about, well, you know, you're going to ruin some of these dramatic scenes that the dog is in, because people are going to be looking at this puppeteer walking through. Right. That's horrible. And the interesting thing, of course, was what they discovered. Tommy believed in the art of what I was doing, and he persisted, and they went ahead with the show with me doing Mate, as well as performing a portrait puppet of Tommy that played him as a young man in the show, and then he would take on the persona of his father. So you would have all these flashbacks, and he and the marionette did dances together, and which was fantastic. So I actually danced with Tommy too, and through the marionette. Yeah. But anyway, the dog Mate was so important. And when we went out starting the tour, the critics just went nuts over the dog. And there were comments like, "Can an inanimate object win a Tony Award?" and things like this. And so it was very exciting. And people would come up during intermission. Actually, I heard this story from Richard Sherman. And he went out during intermission of the show early on, and he would listen to people's comments about the show. And what he heard was they were arguing over how the dog could do everything in perfect time to the music. And they were just suspending that disbelief so much. Suspending disbelief, and they didn't see this guy in black. I was dressed as a busker, but all in black. Mm-hmm. But I wasn't covered. My face wasn't covered. My hands weren't covered. I was just right there on stage working this puppet. Yeah. But people believed in that dog. And, of course, in the story, the dog, they actually didn't want it to appear too much in the second act. So they decided it got hit by a car and it was gone. Well, when audience found out about that, they were just outraged. They didn't want that dog to die. So it took on a life of its own, which we never expected, and it got some of the most incredible reviews. And so it was a wonderful experience. Unfortunately, it was ill-fated because we had already toured all over the United States, and we were down in Tampa, Florida, finishing out the very last weeks before we were due to open in St. James Theater. And Tommy slipped off. He had to jump up on these lamppost bases that were quite high. And they were doing all of these choreographed routines, jumping up on the lampposts and swinging around him. And he jumped up and slipped off and broke his foot. And he was put in a cast. And there were still 2 weeks to go in Tampa. And he wanted the show to finish out Tampa. We didn't know what was going to happen after that. But he did, and they even were putting in new musical numbers. This was what was so challenging to me, is that they would bring Richard Sherman would come in with a brand new musical number, and they would choreograph it in the afternoon, and it had to be in the show that night. And when I was a theater major in college, if someone would have said, you're going to learn a whole elaborate routine with a marionette and you're going to have it done ready for performance that night, I would have said, you're nuts. I will never do that. I would never be able to.
Yeah.
But the funny thing is that you find out you are able to do these things when you're in that position.
Yeah, you have to.
Yeah.
If you don't,
you're a professional and you just do it. You just buck up and you go in there and it happens. And that's some of the magic of theater, I think.
Yeah. Well, you've also done something that not many puppeteers have done, and that is perform on The Tonight Show, which is, like, because I was thinking about it, I was like, well, there's, the Muppets have been on The Tonight Show, and, probably
times.
Sherry Lewis and Lamb Chop were on there, and Waylon Flowers and Madam were on there, and I think Alf maybe was on there once, but that's about it. So how did that come about?
Pretty rare for marionette artists, especially. There's a couple of marionette artists that did appear on there, but yes, that was very rare. And it was because I was finally allowed to perform at the Magic Castle for the first time in Hollywood, which I am performing at right now, coincidentally. But anyway, being at the Magic Castle, a lot of industry people like to come there. And the talent coordinator for The Tonight Show, and this was my very first time performing in the castle, talent coordinator was there and saw me, and he just flipped out over one of the trapeze number that I do with marionettes. He said, we have to have that on The Tonight Show. He came backstage immediately after my show. And I said, wow, well, that's really exciting. I said, but the trapeze artist is terrible on television. I said, the camera's not going to be able to follow her easily. She's going to burn across the screen and things like. He said, oh, well, the cameramen on The Tonight Show are the best there are. He said, they'll be able to handle that. And he said, what other character do you think is best? And I said, I had a jazz singer that was patterned after Nell Carter, and she was my personal favorite character. She just always had so much personality and heart. Mm-hmm. And so I said, that's the one I would love to do on The Tonight Show. And he said, great. He said, we'll have you do those two. He said, that will be a 6-minute spot, which we usually give to the comedians. We don't give it to variety acts, but we're going to have you do that 6-minute spot. And it would be a very long story to tell you all the ins and outs that went through, because I was bumped twice off of The Tonight Show. One time actually on the show with Johnny Carson, ready to go on, and Buddy Hackett went 30 seconds overtime into my spot. So then he said, I know we can't cut your spot, so we'll have you back. But anyway, it was probably a year at least later before I actually appeared on The Tonight Show. But this was one of my dreams when I was a kid. I saw The Tonight Show and I wanted to be on The Tonight Show. So when it finally happened, it was just like, I couldn't believe it. I was so nervous I lost my voice actually backstage.
Well, that's. Did you have to use your voice? Was your no? Okay,
no.
Good. So.
Everything about what I do is either pre-record or it's visual.
Right.
So that's the wonderful thing about it. I'm action oriented instead of vocally oriented.
Right. Well, let's talk a little bit about your film work, because you've done some amazing film work, and being John Malkovich was there's just so many incredible pieces of puppetry in there. And I think, like, to you, it's like, oh, yeah, it was easy to do this. But to me, it's like, wait, this marionette just did a somersault. How did that, like, it's crazy. Can you talk about working on that film?
Again, this was another major turning point in my career because this, out of the blue, we were called up. We lived in Pasadena, California at that time. So Spike Jonze, the director, and one of the producers called up and said, we'd like to come and visit your workshop and see what you do. And so we invited them. My workshop was my garage. Mm-hmm. And they came in and they actually photographed the garage because I didn't realize it, but the character in the film was, his workshop was in kind of a garage. So they wanted this kind of look. And I showed them what I did and everything. And we didn't even know exactly how they found out about us. We suspected we had sent a video to Francis Ford Coppola, who was going to be doing a film on Pinocchio. So we thought maybe there'd be a possibility he'd need a marionette operator. And since Francis Ford Coppola eventually became the father-in-law to Spike Jonze, he married Sofia Coppola, Spike did. And we suspect that maybe there was a connection there, that Spike actually was able to see this video and then decided that I could work on this film. But they came in and they offered me the job on the spot after they saw me performing live in front of them. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to figure out how to make this very long story short, but I couldn't do it because they had film dates set that conflicted with I was going to be working at the Lido in Paris, and there was also the Disney cruise ship that was making its inaugural cruise that I was supposed to be on. So I had these other commitments, and I don't like canceling commitments. And although this film seemed so interesting to me, the script by Charlie Kaufman was totally off the wall. And when I read it, I went, oh, gee, I don't know. This is so weird. But yet the marionette stuff in it was very important to the plot. It was integral to what was going on. And Spike said to me they wanted the marionette artist to look like he was just brilliant. They wanted the character that John Cusack played to be a brilliant marionette artist. And so that was important to him. And I felt like I had everything they needed. I had the experience and the abilities. And I don't toot my own horn, and I don't feel that egotistical about what I do. But at that point, I felt like I was the right person for this job, but yet I wasn't available for the dates they wanted. And I said to them at the time, the marionette stuff is very complex. I said, you really should save this and shoot it separate. They wanted to shoot it in between doing live shots with the actors. So they would just take a break from there, and then they'd run over to a small set, and I would be doing stuff. And I said, this really needs to be focused on. But anyway, they didn't want to do that. So I figured, okay, I lost this opportunity. And I went off to Europe. I worked at the Lido and did all these other things. When I came back 6 months later, they were calling us again. And he said, we'd like you to come in and work on this project. And I said, well, I didn't make the puppets, number one, so I don't know how they work. So I said, send me the puppets. And they showed me a video of the Dance of Despair and Disillusionment done by John Malkovich and his stunt double, because it had all of those things in it. And I looked at this, and they said, this is what you have to do. And I said, well, you basically have taken every move that's considered impossible for a marionette to do, and you've put it in there. You have the puppet running across stage and stopping, frozen, which marionettes don't do that well. You have it doing a wall walk. You have a forward somersault and a back handspring. All of those things, basically marionettes aren't made for that. And I said, I think I can get most everything except maybe the forward somersault and back handspring. I said, you need to stop camera halfway through, and I'll clear strings, and then I can continue the move. He said, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want it looked tricked. I want it to be real on screen. And I said, well, I'll do the best I can. I can't promise. But basically, they sent the puppets to me. I had to rebuild them because I didn't make them, and there were problems with the way they were constructed, a lot of problems. I had to redo almost every joint in the body to get them to operate the way they needed to for the storyboards that I saw. And they gave me lots of time to do it, several months to do that. And they said, when you're ready, and they also put the entire set in my garage, and I could rehearse on it. They said, when you're ready, let us know, and we're going to rent the studio, and we're going to shoot the marionettes. So they were already back to what I had recommended to begin with. And so we went into the studio. Oh, and I must say, I had one separate puppet that was a stunt double to do the somersault back handspring. And I worked with that, and I couldn't figure out how to get this somersault and handspring. And then I swear it was only like 3 days before we were ready to go into the studio. And suddenly it came to me. I could picture exactly what it needed. And it had to be simplified down to the extreme. There were just two very simple pieces of doweling with strings attached to them and two separate sets of strings for the puppet. And I had to start out with my arms in kind of a contorted position and go into the move. And then when I was finished, my arms would be in a different contorted position. But I could do a forward somersault and a back handspring with this stunt double puppet. And that's all it was made to do.
Wow.
And so we went into the studio, and I was ready, and we shot that whole thing. And Spike, when he saw it, he was ecstatic over it. He couldn't believe all the things that we did. And then they had to go back and reshoot everything that they had done before with other puppeteers. This is what had happened. They had hired other people, and it didn't work out for them for whatever reason. And so then they reshot everything with me, and they wrote a whole new scene for me. Charlie Kaufman wrote the Heloise and Abelard scene on the street where John Cusack is punched in the face. Mm-hmm. And so then I worked with John Cusack on the street with that for distance shots, and then we had to do all the close-ups, and they rented a studio again and did that whole process for that scene. And then Spike even came to our garage at one point and shot just a few little pieces that appear way at the end of the film. There's like a samurai suicide scene, and he had a handheld camera, and shot that in my garage in Pasadena. So all of the performance of the marionettes is all my work on the film, and my partner David Alexander, if there were two marionettes appearing on screen at once. But it was a long process, and it was a challenging process because I was asked to do things that I would never even attempt on my own. Mm-hmm. So it was a stretching for me, and I like that. I've gotten to the point now where I don't fear that the way I did.
Well, it's like what you were talking about when you were doing the show with Tommy Toon about, I've never been able to rehearse something and be in the show. It's like, well, you're going to find out you can do it. You can make a marionette do a forward somersault.
Exactly. Every step of the way in my career, I've been pushed with this, and it's been an expanding experience and a wonderful experience for me.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about the work you did on the Oz, the Great and Powerful film? Because it was sort of a different way of doing puppetry for a film, I think.
Yes, it was a unique experience for me because I got this call from Disney, from one of the producers for this new film, and they said they were interested in having me work on this film, and it was called Oz, the Great and Powerful. Well, I'm a real Oz fan, so I got very excited about it. And when I found out more about it, when they actually gave me a script to read, there were two characters in there that were a monkey and a little girl that was made out of china called the China Girl. And I thought one of those had to be the puppet they were thinking of. Well, it was the China Girl that they were interested in. And they asked me to come out for a screen test. And they gave me two recorded scenes they had where they had auditioned actors or something, and they had recorded the scenes. And they said, you'll be working to these two scenes, and how soon can you have them ready? And I said, 2 days. Mm-hmm. They gave me a day and a half, and they flew me out. I happened to have a puppet that was exactly that size, 18 inches tall, and it was a little girl puppet. So I recostumed her because she was dressed in shorts, and I really wanted her to have a skirt the way China Girl I thought would have. And I rehearsed the scene, and they flew me out. And Sam Raimi, the director, watched the scene, and he just loved my work right away. And I could tell. And he said, "Can you stick around for a while?" And I said, "Sure." And the interesting thing was that they had the China Girl designed so that she would be all China. That means her costume as well. Well, as a marionette, almost impossible to operate if everything was China. Her skirt, of course, would be formed this like bell around her legs, which means that all of her actions, if she had to get down on one knee or something like that, would be restricted. She couldn't do any of it. And I said to Sam at the time, it would be really important for her to have a cloth skirt. And I said, my mother was a doll collector, so I know China dolls are in regular clothes. And it turns out, I think, that they wanted the China Girl to be all China because it would be less expensive for the CGI, because she was going to be a CGI character ultimately. It was less expensive to do the CGI with stiff clothes as it is to try to duplicate the movement of fabric. But I wasn't the only one that wanted her that way. I think Sam secretly wanted her to. He seemed to kind of be leaning that way, but they wanted to test it. So they took the marionette that I brought and they dressed her in a cardboard outfit. He asked if they could do that over lunch. And they did, and then he had me do the scenes over again. And I showed him exactly what would happen if she tried to do the same movements. And I had created all sorts of interesting movements with special stringing on the marionette. And so it turned out they changed their mind, and they redesigned the China Girl so that she would have soft clothes on as well. And but Sam said to me at that meeting right after my audition, he said, "Well, this is probably going to be a 5 to 6 month of shoot, and then you may have to tour to do promo for the film and stuff like that." He said, "Is that something you'd be interested in doing?" I said, "I thrive in that kind of atmosphere."
Where do I sign up?
Yeah, I was trying not to look too excited, but I was. It was something I really wanted to do. Again, it was after reading the script and seeing what she would have to do, I felt like I was really the right person to do this. And I ended up building the puppets, although that wasn't the original intent. But the special effects studio had already created a maquette, and I asked them to cut that maquette into pieces and send the pieces to me, and then I jointed the pieces together as a marionette. Some parts of the body, the actual torso, I couldn't use. I had to carve a wooden torso body that had the right movement in it, the right jointing. And so I created 2 marionettes, and then they flew me up to Michigan, and I started the shoot up there at the Raleigh Studios in Pontiac, Michigan. And it did. It took 5 months to do that, and working right with James Franco and Michelle Williams and Mila Kunis and Rachel Weisz. And Zach Braff played the part of the monkey. And for the monkey, they had created kind of a ventriloquist figure that moved its mouth. Sam loved what I was doing with the marionette right away. I was doing things, they threw me into one of the most difficult scenes right away, and it was a scene that was cut from the film later when they changed the whole plot line of the film. But it was a scene in which James Franco had to hold her in the palms of his hand, and she was scolding him for doing things that weren't proper, that weren't what he was supposed to be doing as his highest ideal. And it was a very quiet scene, and this was a huge set. It was a $210 million film, and at any given time there were probably at least 50 technicians all around with computer monitors and things, and they were adding special effects in just as to give the director an idea of what a finished product might look like, and all of this. And I was supposed to have a monitor to work with, just like the Muppets work with a monitor, but I have to have a monitor that's in reverse sweep, because if I try to switch from looking at the control and strings, which I must do, I have to look back and forth. I can't just focus on the monitor full time. And I didn't have a monitor. And I was just too nervous this first day to even ask for one. So I decided I would work blind. And I'm working the China girl. They have me up on all these boxes to get me high enough because she's short-strung. And she's sitting in James's hand, and we do a take, and I'm trying to internalize all of her lines, because she didn't have a moving mouth. I did give her moving eyes, which they didn't ask for, but I wanted her as expressive as possible. And I internalized, I kept it quiet, and she did all these things. And we finished the take, and Sam said, that was great, but he said she started to move off focus during this one part. He said, so can we do it again? And the way you keep a focus, of course, is to be able to look at the monitor, right, which I didn't have. So I thought, okay, I'm just going to concentrate. I'm going to keep her in focus. And we did a second take with her. And while we were doing that take, I felt James rotate his hands ever so slightly. He was helping me focus her into camera, which I will be forever grateful. He was really great to work with. That was my first day on the set. But Sam told me within a week after we were working that he had fallen in love with the China girl. And there were people that were walking up to me and saying, oh, the marionette has to be the actual one in the film because she's great. And she was being voiced by Joey King, who was just incredible. An 11-year-old who was going on 37, I think. She's so mature, and she was so aware of everything. And she realized right away that a marionette had a certain pace that it could operate. And if you tried to go too far with speed as far as the way you speak your lines and things like that, she just seemed to adapt to it. And every little thing, she could see on a monitor what I was doing with the marionette. She was in a soundproof booth off in another place where they were recording her. And she would do all sorts of little noises and things that went along with what I was doing physically for the puppet. So we were just in perfect sync almost from the very beginning. It was a marvelous experience, but a totally unique experience. And I knew she was going to be CGI ultimately in the film so that people wouldn't know what I was creating. But basically, they took the performance that I gave to the marionette on screen with the actors. They would shoot a couple of takes, usually with the marionette, so the actors could hold it and react with it, and then they would try and shoot a couple of takes where they would just mime, and they wouldn't have anything. And whatever take was the best one, that's what they would use in the film. And they would just work from there. If they had to get rid of the marionette and put the CGI over the top of it, that's what they would do if it was necessary.
Can you still see your movements in the film?
I can, yeah. And other people have told me that my friends who are puppeteers who know my work really well, they tell me that they see my performance in the finished product. Mm-hmm. So I'm astounded that people could be that observant of what I do to know that I have a certain style or something of movement. But evidently there are people who say they can see that. But it was, they took the movements that I created and turned them into the CGI. And the head of animation, Troy Saliba, was a great friend of mine working on that project. And he was really happy. He said they've never had so much material to go on when they're creating a CGI character as they had for that film. And that was Sam's thing. He wanted not only for them to have a lot of material, he had me go off at other times and just show them all sorts of actions that she could do. And they filmed all of that. And when they had to redub lines, when they changed the plot of the film later, and they had to redo some of the lines, he had me come in and they were filming, and I would have the China girl right beside Joey King, and while she was saying these new lines, looping them, I would be performing with the marionette. So again, they were filming that. Mm-hmm. So they had so much material to work with. And it was a joy to do 5 months of a very unique experience. And Sam also at one point then even requested I bring in my monkey, because I had showed a monkey that I had. And so I just gave them monkey movements and things that would help them with the other character. But I'm uncredited for that, and that's fine, because my reason for being there was China Girl.
Well, it's also amazing that it's puppetry, which is this old art form, combined with CG coming together to create this performance.
Yes, and I, as far as I know, I think that was kind of a unique situation there. I don't know if there's ever been a marionette before that has created a performance that they've then they've overdubbed with CGI work. Yeah. But anyway, it was, and Sam Raimi was got to be one of my favorite directors. He was just marvelous to work with. He would most often address China Girl, but every once in a while he would say the puppet guy.
Well, that's when you know you're doing your job right?
Yes,
that's
yeah,
when he's
yeah.
addressing the puppet. As someone who has done film and television work and performed live, do you have one that you prefer?
Oh, you know, I really love the live performance. I love being in a theater, like right now when I'm in Magic Castle and the audience is really close. It's an intimate house. And I can feel them. I get so energized. I mean, I have to pull myself back because my energy just wants to shoot out like crazy through the marionettes, and then they can go nuts. So to keep that control, that I have to pull myself back. Yeah. And I love that feeling. But I'll tell you, all the film work I've done, I've enjoyed that too, because there's something about being able to do the slightest little move, the most subtle little thing happening with the puppet, and it reads on the screen, you know, to so many people, and your performance just goes on and on forever, which is kind of, you know, I'd never had that happen before. To have my performance in Being John Malkovich preserved forever like that is a unique situation. And so I love that too. There's aspects of every part of the profession that I enjoy.
Yeah. I thought this was an interesting thing for puppeteers who maybe want to do live shows and live touring shows, is that on your website, you have a page that just has all the information required for you to do your show. It's got your technical specs. It's got your travel information. How important is that page for what you do?
Oh, it's very important. And of course, it's only important if people actually read it and follow.
True, yes.
We did a tour one time for community concerts, and they sent out a page of all these things that we requested, and it wasn't an outlandish number of things. I didn't request, you know, only red M&Ms in the dressing room or something like that. It was just I wanted water in the dressing room, and then the technical needs. And we'd get to the venue, and we'd go, okay, now what lighting do we have? Oh, well, we can't use any of that lighting. That's all for the drama club, they would say. And I'd go, well, if we don't have any lighting, then nobody can see what I'm doing, so we don't have a show. And so suddenly they'd bring down the member of the drama club, and they'd open up the tech booth, and they'd have lighting for us. Or they wouldn't have any sound, or they wouldn't have a follow spot. And so these very basic things, I don't know why people would take a sheet and sign it and send it back and then have no intention of delivering these things. But sometimes that's what you have to deal with as well. And so you have to have backup.
Yeah, every venue will be different. It's going to be good or it's going to be bad. I've found that I can adjust to all sorts of weird and outlandish things that happen or changes that are made to my show at various times, and I've still been able to perform. And it's certainly, I think, the number of shows that you do really puts you at ease, you know, in terms of like, I can handle anything. Like this happened 2 years ago at this place. This is nothing now, you know.
That's right. And with marionettes, they're so technical, you know, it's like being a magician. And you know that whatever can go wrong, probably one of those things will go wrong at some point. And it's true. And so you just learn to roll with it. You learn how to deal with these problems and not make them so that they're just the end of the world for you. Right. Of course, I'm always disappointed if a show doesn't go as perfect as I want it to. But it's at the same time, I'm a little bit easier on myself now than I used to be. I'm really what you would call a perfectionist.
Another thing on your website is that you sell a replica of Taffy, the marionette dog that we spoke of earlier. How did the decision come to sell replicas of those?
Well, originally it was when we were working on Busker Alley, and they really wanted something in the lobby, and they knew people were already falling in love with the dog while we were touring. So they said to us, we'd really like it if you could make a commercial version of Taffy that we could sell. And so we started working on that, and I designed out a simplified version of Taffy that could have all cast parts, 2-part resin pieces, and they could be weighted differently and stuff for the right balance for the marionette. And my stipulation was I wanted a marionette that worked really well. I don't want to put a marionette into somebody's hands that is a frustration.
Right.
Because I want this art form to survive. I want people to be inspired by it, and young people to maybe decide, wow, I'd really like to do something like this. And so I designed it out, and it was a 6-year project. Of course, Busker Alley, of course, ended abruptly, so we didn't have it for that. But later, we actually did produce these marionettes. And again, it was because the marionettes that I started out with, the Pelhams, that company no longer exists. So there are no good commercial marionettes for kids to learn and to be inspired by. And so we had to create this marionette. And I'm glad we did it, but it was a huge project and a very expensive one for us. And we'll probably never see a profit from these characters. But again, you do a lot for the love of the art, and that's one of the things that I've done.
Yeah, well, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful piece.
You.
Yeah,
it's 11 strings, and Taffy has 20. So we were able to simplify it down a lot, left out a little bit of the animation in the face, a lot of the detail stuff. But the puppies can basically do all the movements that Taffy can do, and they have as much expression.
Yeah. Well, as we're wrapping up here, one last thing I want to touch on is that you are very involved with the National Puppetry Conference at the O'Neill.
Yes. And
could you talk a bit about what you do there?
Yes, I've taught there now 16 years, and the first time they hired me was only a few years after Being John Malkovich came out. And I was getting much more of a higher profile then, and so I think I always wanted to attend the O'Neill before then, but I'd never had the opportunity. I just didn't have the time. When you're trying to work as a full-time professional, it's really difficult to find this time to do training with other people. And they asked me to come out as a guest artist one year and teach in the marionette strand. And Jim Rose, who is a second-generation puppeteer, his parents were the Rufus and Margot Rose marionettes, and they were famous. They traveled all over the United States, and of course they were probably most famous for working the puppets on the Howdy Doody show in the later years. And but they did so much more than that. And Jim Rose, second generation, he works in the marionette strand every year at the O'Neill, and he concentrates on marionette construction. So we share it. I concentrate on marionette manipulation. So what I usually request of students is that they bring in a puppet that they've built, a marionette that they've built, and short-strung, because we can only work cabaret style. We don't have bridges and things to work on at O'Neill. And I work with these people with that puppet, and we create a vignette for it. Well, first of all, we see how well it works. Mm-hmm. And the first few days that they're there, we do modifications. Sometimes we have to rip the puppet apart and practically start over again. But we get it rebuilt so that it operates well, so that it's strung well, it has a good control bar at the top that holds all the strings in a configuration. And then I spend the rest of the week with them. They work out a routine. If it's a variety routine, I help them choreograph something. If it's a dramatic routine, I direct them in that. And then they rehearse it and they perform it in front of a live audience then at the end of the week. Several live audiences. There's 3 performances I think there's 3 performances total that they do at the end of the week. So it's a wonderful experience because this is a very creative atmosphere. The instructors are all professional puppeteers working in all different areas. There are several Muppet puppeteers that work there every year, and people who work on Sesame Street are usually there, and the head of the Department of Puppetry at the University of Connecticut, which is one of the principal places where people can study puppetry. They can get a master's degree if they want at the University of Connecticut in puppetry. But anyway, Bart Rockerburton is the head of the department there. He comes there and he helps with O'Neill. So O'Neill is almost like a satellite campus from the University of Connecticut, but it's a really intensive week and very creative week. And people can be exposed to all different types of puppets, shadows, rods, and hand and mouth, and mouth puppets, rather, hand puppets, and also the marionettes.
Yeah, it's an amazing experience, and I know that on the show before we've talked about how great it is, but people should go if they have not been.
Absolutely,
it's really amazing.
Yeah. I like I said, I would have given my teeth to go before, and now I go every year, of course.
Who is a puppeteer or a couple puppeteers you think that every puppeteer should know and look up their work?
Probably, I'd be picking out people that did marionettes, first of all. I mean, there are obvious choices nowadays but most people know all about Jim Henson and Frank Oz, and I was so grateful that I got to work with them at one point. I worked on the Christmas special they did with John Denver in 1979, so it was all the original puppeteers working on it then. And I just sat and watched Frank and Jim perform with John Denver. Every free moment I had, I'd just go into the studio and watch them do it. But so, for that style of thing, seeing everything that they've done, and I know you've already interviewed a lot of people that have worked with the Muppets, and so people know about that. But as far as marionettes go, some of the cream of the crop of marionettes of the past were Frank Paris, Bob Bromley, Walton and O'Rourke. And Tony Urbano, of course, is like a child of that era. He knew those people and was inspired by them, but he also worked for Bill Baird. Mm-hmm. So Bill Baird worked under Tony Sarg, who was the first great American puppeteer that was using marionettes. So I have a genealogy that's a puppet genealogy, and it comes right from, I consider, the Holden marionettes, John Holden in England, who was touring in Europe, and he inspired Tony Sarg. Tony Sarg inspired Bill Baird. Bill Baird actually worked for Tony Sarg. Tony Urbano was inspired by Bill Baird and others too, Turnabout Theater that happened in Los Angeles. But then I learned from Tony Urbano. So that's my genealogy in puppetry.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I saw these other great variety performers of like I said, Walton and O'Rourke. I never saw them perform, but I only saw their puppets. I actually went to visit their granddaughter, and she had the puppets, and she allowed me to pick them up, and she would even open up the heads so I could see the animation inside, things like that. They were doing incredible things in the 30s and 40s. Bob Bromley also, he traveled all over the world. He was a very high-paid and highly regarded artist in Europe, so much so that he was invited to perform for the wedding of Prince Rainier and Princess Grace. And later I went on to do a Royal Command performance for Prince Rainier and also his son, Prince Albert. And because I worked in Monaco several times. Mm-hmm. But so I'm trying to continue that same tradition. But those are all people that puppeteers need to be aware of. They need to check what their history was, because young puppeteers don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are some incredible things that were done, even turn of the century, from late 1800s to the 1900s, that we're still doing today. Mm-hmm. So you don't have to start from scratch.
Right.
You can build on that, and that's what I've always tried to do. Is I've tried to build on it to make it even more than I've ever seen before, or something a little bit different. There are lots of traditional acts that are done with marionettes, but it's what you have to bring to it as a unique artist that still continues the tradition and the art.
Yeah. Well, Phillip, if people want to connect with you online, where can they go?
They can go to my website, which is hubermarionettes.com. They can also friend me on Facebook, although I'm getting really up to my limit on friends because it was just a private page. I didn't do a business page, so I may have to change that. But they're welcome to check me out on Facebook, and they'll find me there. And on Twitter. And
Well, I will put links to all these things in the show notes. And I just want to say thank you so much for being on the show, because when I originally started this show, I made a list of people, and you were right at the top of the list. So it's an honor to have you on the show.
Well, thank you. I feel so pleased to be on.
I cannot thank Phillip Huber enough for being on the show. I have links to his website and more in the show notes for this episode number 17, over at underthepuppet.com. Well, since we were talking about marionettes, I thought I'd recommend a book on the subject. Check out The Complete Book of Marionettes by Mabel and Les Beaton. The book features chapters on all aspects of building marionettes, but also has instruction and advice on manipulation and performance. This information may be a little bit dated by today's standards, but this book provides a solid foundation for those interested in learning more about marionettes. I've included a link to the book so you can find out more in the show notes for this episode. Again, that's episode number 17, over at underthepuppet.com. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of Under the Puppet. I welcome your feedback via email at hello@SaturdayMorningMedia.com or via Twitter, where you can find the show at username Under the Puppet. You can also find us on Facebook by searching Under the Puppet. I want to hear your thoughts and suggestions on questions I should be asking and for future guests. Also, the goal for this show is to talk to puppeteers making it happen in all sorts of styles of puppetry. So if you know an amazing Boon Raku or shadow puppet artist, please reach out. Let me know who I should be talking to. Thank you so much for listening. Talk to you next time on Under the Puppet. Music for this episode is by Dan Ring, and this episode was edited by Steven Staver. Under the Puppet is a production of Saturday Morning Media and is made possible by the Saturday Morning Media Patreon patrons who've gone to patreon.com/Saturday Morning Media and set up a monthly pledge for as little as $1 a month. Huge thanks to Shay Stewart, Mer Lafferty, Jeff Peterson, Dale Gadania, Steven Staver, Jackie Klimo, Melissa Crawford, Dave Slesher of the Evil Genius Chronicles, Mike Coughlin, Dorothy Pachoco, John D., Kathy Crawford, Brian Greer, Kerry Whitney, Chuck Tomasi from the Technorama podcast, Chris Foster, Stephen Ng, Clinton of ComedyForecast.com, Vicky DeVries, Mike Wobschall, Twitter user Butts and Gear, aka Wildcat, Eve Cunning, Mike Hamilton, Gaston Moreno, Reed Loveland, Ivan Asquith, Vanessa Whitney, Peggy Etra, Kristen Hogan of Squid Friends, David Akers, Zoe Palladino, Ellen Multari, Christopher Harris, Rachel Jackson of Vox Fabuli Puppets, Carolyn Weisner, John Petty, Rachel Hansen, Darcy Prevost, Fernando Torres, Ron McAdams, Pearly Q Magic, Jason Domer, Cora Goodall, Lee Barrett, Casino Skunk, The Misty Minute, Peter Capesser, Night Gig Studios, Joelle Rechtford Tig, Adrian Rose Leonard, Earth to John Francis, RJ, Ginger J. Fitz, Megapodtastic, Paul Brunel, Catherine Hannaford, Alan Gratz, Rachel Gibbous, John R. Donald, and Jude Major. If you'd like to support this show and the other fun content from Saturday Morning Media, become a patron. Head on over to patreon.com/Saturday Morning Media and set up your monthly pledge today. You can also tell a friend about the show or leave the show a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thank you so much for listening. Under the Puppet is copyright 2018 Saturday Morning Media Grant Pachoco executive producer. All rights reserved. www.SaturdayMorningMedia.com. You've been listening to Saturday Morning Media. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.